Hello, everyone. This is part one of a video series on drugs in America, or more specifically, about drugs being illegal. This video will be about the war on drugs. It will attempt to give some background and history to how we've gotten to where we are now, and it will focus primarily on the political implications of the drug war that extend beyond health. Part two of this series is about bodily autonomy and asks the question, do people have the right to do things that may harm themselves? Part 3 is about what it actually means for something to be illegal. It will go into the personal costs of criminalization, arrests, rights being taken away, and the difficulty for people with criminal records to get jobs. Then the question is, are people using a substance deserving of that sort of treatment, and is it helpful? Finally, in Part 4, this series then investigates other possible solutions to drug addiction. It will examine policies tried in other countries, their effectiveness, and what could be done here. I hope to see you back for the other parts. Anyways, let's get started. Part 1, the war on drugs. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced that the United States was going to war. This war would be fought both at home and abroad, but the fighting would not be against another nation or people. This would be a war on drugs. In a press conference, he said, "America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new, all-out offensive." Later adding, "This administration has declared all-out global war on the drug menace." The war on drugs took the form of increased scrutiny as well as heavy, punitive responses for drug use, manufacture, and distribution. The war on drugs saw the creation of mandatory minimum sentencing and drug scheduling. The stated reason behind a drug scheduling was how dangerous it was and if it had any medical uses. Schedule 1 drugs were considered to be the most dangerous with no medical use. Under this system, they therefore received the harshest punishments for use. Some examples of Schedule 1 drugs were marijuana, LSD, heroin, and ecstasy. Drug scheduling's accuracy has been called into question, since drugs like marijuana have proved to not be very dangerous, but were still placed in the top category for danger. To enforce these new laws, the DEA was created. But this war on drugs didn't come from nowhere. Anti-drug campaigns have been growing ever since 1909, when the United States passed its first ever drug prohibition law. The Smoking Opium Exclusion Act, which came 26 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act, and primarily affected Chinese immigrants, who were the main users of smoking opium. It did not, however, affect the other types of opium, which were primarily used by white Americans. On August 17, 1909, the LA Times said that the Opium Exclusion Act was, quote, the death sentence for Chinatown. Slowly afterwards, more and more substances would be made illegal. In the 1960s, leading up to the war on drugs, the United States underwent significant political upheaval with the civil rights movement and mass protests against the Vietnam War. In reference to this, John Ehrlichman, Nixon's domestic policy advisor, said in 1994 to journalist Dan Baum, "You want to know what this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." The drug war was expanded in the 80s and 90s under Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. with the number of people in prison for nonviolent drug offenses skyrocketing from under 50,000 in 1980 to over 400,000 by 1997. Under Reagan, the punishment for crack, which was primarily used by black people, was raised to be 100 times the punishment for cocaine, which was primarily used by white people. Representative Melvin Watt from North Carolina said to Congress, someone selling $225 worth of crack gets the same sentence of someone selling $50,000 of cocaine. In 1995, Bill Clinton rejected the United States Sentencing Commission's recommendation to remove that disparity and instead signed a law solidifying it. Meanwhile, in 1983, LAPD Police Chief Daryl Gates was founding the DARE drug education program. It quickly became the most prolific drug education program in the country and had partnered with the majority of schools nationwide. Gates had faced criticism over testimony earlier that year to Congress that, quote, casual drug users should be taken out and shot. But this wasn't Gates' first brush with controversy either. In 1978, he said that Hispanic officers don't get promoted as often as white officers because they are lazier. And in 1982, he said that black people die more often from police chokeholds, not due to any wrongdoing by police, but rather because their veins or arteries do not open as fast as they do in normal people. I think we're starting to see a bit of a pattern here, right? From the beginning, drug prohibition has been almost inseparable from racism. The Opium Exclusion Act targeting the Chinese, the war on drugs starting specifically as a response to the civil rights movement, the vast disparity in punishments between drugs used by whites versus non-whites, and the largest drug education group being founded by somebody who said all of that. So where does that leave us now? Attitudes towards the war on drugs are shifting. It is widely considered to be a failure. During the height of the drug war from 1980 to 2008, drug deaths nearly tripled, from 4.8 deaths for every 100,000 citizens to 13.5. We are currently in the middle of a worsening opioid crisis and have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Things are changing though. Marijuana is becoming legal in more and more states, and the disparity for punishments between crack and cocaine is shrinking, albeit slowly, due to public pushback against drug war policies. So, that ends part 1. Thanks for watching. The conversation on drugs has so many intersections with things like capitalism, race, and the criminal justice system that it's impossible to cover them all in this video or even in the whole series. Remember to check back in for part 2, bodily autonomy, whenever I get around to making it.